So I got a question for you. How are you going to negotiate your buyer agent commission? How are you going to get paid? Are you going to get signatures from them before you show properties? And how are you going to build value around what you're doing so they don't find someone else that's going to do it for 1% or for $1,900? We'll talk about that today. Welcome to today's morning meeting. I'm Greg Luther, the one guy that meets with you every single week to help you in growing your real estate business. Today, we'll talk about how you get paid in your real estate business because we know all the rules are changing. And here, just a couple of weeks away on August 17th, the rules have changed. The way that we do business has changed. And there's a lot of rules that have changed, not just commission. I think a lot of these changes have been kind of shoved to the side because everybody's worried about how they're going to get paid. So we'll talk about that today. We know the seller's compensation to the buyer can no longer be in the MLS. You can no longer have a standard agreement, which there was no standard commission to begin with, but it's changed drastically. And of course, you have to have a buyer representation agreement signed that specifically says how much you will get paid before you can even unlock a door. There is no such thing as a touring agreement. They've already shown that what Zillow was putting out is not compliant. My understanding is there's no way you can utilize anything like that because it's not replacing what's required, which is to specifically disclose how much you're going to get before you show the property. I want to talk about that today. I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Before we even get rocking here, I'd like to know your opinion. Now that you need to negotiate your commission and the buyer has to pay that if the seller doesn't, now that that has to be a specific percentage or dollar amount on that contract before you show homes, now that you know that the buyers are starting to negotiate it and they're saying, I'm not paying you that much. I'm going to go over here, or I'll use this guy, or I'll go directly to the listing agent. My question for you, and I want you to let me know in the comments here, what do you think will be the average buyer agent percentage over the course of the next several months here? What do you think the average percentage will be there in your own local marketplace? Is it going to be 2? Will it be 2.5? Will it be 3? Will there be flat fee buyer brokers that are out there advertising, which we're already seeing, will represent you for $995. We're already seeing that nationwide. We've seen this in multiple states. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the average is going to be? And our topic for the day today is to talk about where this is going to be posted. How are agents going to communicate with each other? We've always depended on the MLS to tell us, here's how much the seller's willing to cooperate. And there was kind of a average in any given area. There's no set fee by any means. Commissions have always been negotiable, but there was always kind of an average. You generally are around 2.5, or you're generally around 3%, kind of depending on the area, right? Well, now you can't have that in the MLS anymore. In some areas, it was so prevalent we didn't even really look at it. We just show all the homes that are available, and we assume this is how the seller is going to play ball with us here. Well, now that's started to change, and it can't be in the MLS. And we're seeing all of these agents online. You're seeing all of this stuff about, well, you can tell them it's a 2.5 to 3 bedroom, like trying to find secret code, right? Tell them that we would rate this a 3 stars listing, telling them how much the commission is, or putting something inside the home, or putting a sign writer out there so that everybody understands it. I got a question for you, and I want you to really think about this. Who gives a shit how much the seller is offering? It's not what you get. It's not what you charge. And the whole reason for the lawsuit to begin with was because the seller and the listing agent were pre-negotiating how much the buyer broker would be paid. That's the reason for the lawsuit in the first place. Now you're saying the seller will determine how much I'm going to be paid? No, that ain't how we play ball. You know what the court said? Commissions are negotiable. Okay, I'm a good negotiator. I provide great value for my customers, my clients. They're going to love what I offer, and they're going to be fine with me negotiating on their behalf. So what the seller thinks they're going to offer has nothing to do with the contract that we're submitting to them. Why do you care? Why do you even want a starting point? Why do you want to know, well, if the seller's only offering 1.5, at least I can talk to my buyer in advance? No. The seller's also asking $1 million for the home. That's not what we're taking. We're going to write a contract and we're going to try to negotiate on our behalf. Now, I want you to rewind for a little bit, rewind a couple of years ago before any of this stuff was even really going on publicly. And I want you to think about the first time buyer that you had, that they were qualified, They had the income. Everything was fine, but they needed help with closing costs. They didn't have money to pay those closing costs out of pocket, but they're highly qualified. It's very simple. You would tell the listing agent, hey, we love the home. We're willing to write an offer on the home. I got a pre-approval letter. These people are good, but they got to have help with closing costs. Regardless of the purchase price, they got to have closing costs because they just don't have the money out of pocket. Now, I know the seller wasn't planning to pay closing costs. I know they didn't pre-negotiate. Well, I'm willing to pay $1,000 towards closing costs and no more. It was zero. But you know what they did? They paid closing costs. So it does not matter what they're offering. I don't care what they're offering. If they want to tell me, great. If the listing agent calls and says, hey, I just want to let you know my seller's planning on paying only 2%. So just so you know, I don't care. My buyer is planning on paying me 8%. It's negotiable. Now, you wouldn't get 8%, of course, but I'm sure you see my point here that we want to make sure we are, in fact, negotiating on our buyer's behalf. You have to have this signature before you unlock doors, before you show homes. You know, a lot of people are like, well, I'll just get an agreement without the price, and then I'll show them the home. If you show them the home and they like that property, they owe you $0. You are entitled to 0. That's all there is to it. So you have to get your numbers right to begin with. You have to get an agreement in writing, and whatever it is that you charge. I don't want you overcharging, but I want you to build value around what you do. If you do things that other buyers agents don't do, if you provide access that other buyers don't have, then it's time for you to start thinking about, how am I going to get this exposed to everybody out there? I'm not sure why I'm getting this little pop-up here. Let me try to skip ads and see if that works for us here. The purpose for us to get this agreement is so we know how much we're trying to put into our purchase contract if we are in fact trying to get the seller to pay it. So if this seller says, if the listing agent says the seller's willing to pay 1%, I don't care. The seller also wants $1 million for the home, but we're only writing an offer at $970. I don't care what the seller wants. Now, it's helpful to try and get to a median, but I represent the buyer. I'm not trying to get a win-win. A win-win is if I beat you twice. I am representing my buyer, and if I can help my buyer from bringing $2,000 or $3,000 to closing, especially if they could finance that, if they could build it into their deal and only pay 5%, that's easier for them to pay the 6% interest rate or 6.5%. By the way, rates went down yesterday. Let's hope that continues, that they can get such a great deal on that rather than trying to come up with all the extra money out of pocket. Closing costs, prepaids, appraisal fee, underwriting fee, realtor costs. All of that, those representation and fees that would be involved. I want to try and build that in if my buyer wants me to. Now, some of them are okay paying it out of pocket. But point of today's video, point of today's training is I don't care how much the listing agent is offering. They're not allowed to pre-negotiate how much I'm worth. They're not allowed to say, oh, well, we already told our listing agent we're only paying 2%. Okay, then I'm not selling your freaking house. Because here's our terms. You could also say, I'm not paying any closing costs for but then I'm not selling your house. You could also say, I want $7 million for then I'm not. You remember everything's negotiable. You remember the court stepped in and the Department of Justice stepped in, and all of these people are saying the listing agent and the seller are not allowed to preset how much that buyer agent can be paid. That's literally the reason for the lawsuit to begin with. So all of these brokers that are out there, and even your MLS that's doing these classes, that people are leaving these classes. Every single board of realtors is doing more classes than they've ever done before because of all these changes. And everybody leaves more confused and more pissed off because nobody knows what they're doing here. I don't care how much the listing agent is offering or the seller is offering. If you want to know in advance so you have an idea how much are we truly negotiating here, that's fine. But if you build value around what you do, you should be getting 3%, 3.5%, whatever it is for you. You should not be getting what everybody else gets if you offer something that's superior. So for the agents involved in our inner circle, where we're offering access to unlisted and pre-market properties before they hit the open marketplace, we can find it clear down to area, price range, neighborhood that buyer wants. We can get a handful of properties where the seller is willing to sell, but they're not yet publicly listed. And no, it's not a pocket listing because they don't agree to list with me. They just agree to pay us a commission for sale by owner. They agree to pay us a commission if we bring our buyer. So it's not a pocket listing. But if we can provide that access, if we're investing our own money in marketing to go out to get those potential properties, of course we deserve to earn more. And more importantly, the buyer would gladly pay you. You are not, here's a voice of reason for you. You are not going to have a hard time negotiating your fee. A buyer will not have a problem paying your fee if you're good at what you do. If you provide value that they can't replace elsewhere. If they can get what you do cheaper, they actually should. So let's have you doing some things that nobody else is doing, that the buyer sees tremendous value in that, and they will defend that you deserve your 2.5% or your 3% or whatever that number is for your area or for your system, the way that you're handling your commissions. So if you've negotiated with the buyer that you get a 3% fee, you then open the doors, you show them homes, you negotiate the deals. The seller comes back and says, well, we already said we're only paying 2%. I know what you said. I also know what I said. What we're doing is we're finding a way to make this work. If we can make the numbers work, you don't care if you pay off their Mustang, as long as the numbers make sense. So what we're doing is we're going back and forth. Now, if we go back and forth and we hit a stalemate at the seller's only willing to pay 2.5%, and then the listing, I can't get the listing agent to fold, because usually you can get them to fold if you need to. If we end up at 2.5%, now I can go to my buyer and I can say, look, we're pretty close on this. There is going to be a 0.5% deficiency here. This would be additional closing costs you would need to bring, just like you're bringing money for appraisal and underwriting and title fee and deed prep and recording the deed and all of those other fees that you have. I'm trying to get the seller to pay for everything. They paid for everything except a 0.5%. So you need to decide, do we want to counter that? Do we want to say last and final offer? Are we okay accepting it as is? Can you bring the difference? But what I'm not going to do is, before I even show the home, the listing agent says, oh, well, my guy's only willing to pay 1%. He said, screw them. If they want a buyer's agent, they can pay him themselves. That's fine. Maybe I'll even let my buyer know that when we first go in there, like, hey, this is going to be a tough negotiation, but I think I can make it work because I'm good at what I do. I don't give a shit what the seller says. But then if they come back to us and they say, okay, well, I want to get 1%, I'm going to pay 1% towards your commission. Well, now we'll negotiate back and forth. And then if we do get to a stalemate, we can then tell our buyer, here's where we're at. But in the meantime, here's what the buyer knows. They owe me 3%, and I'm trying to negotiate for the seller to pay it. If those things change, great, we win. So start thinking about this in your negotiations, because you have to do a better job at describing upfront to the buyers how this is going to work. You have to have a signature in writing that shows this is your buyer broker agreement. I've got some trainings coming up we're doing on this to help everybody with exactly how to handle it. The last thing you should do is, whether you meet them at the home, you sign it on the hood of the car, you meet them at a buyer consultation, everything. You know, I'll give you an example. Last week, I did a training on this, and I said, let's say that, you know, you're getting a signature on the hood of the car and it says, I'm going to get paid this much. I can't unlock the door unless, and everybody's like, well, you should be having a buyer consultation. What the hell's the difference what they're signing on? They still need to sign it. Okay. They're in your office and you have a desk. You still need them to. Why does it matter what they're signing on? It comes down to what you're saying that's compelling to them, that's value driven, that they say, yeah, that sounds great. What you can't say is something silly like, oh, well, with the new rules, are you familiar with the new rules? Yeah, they make us get this stuff signed in advance. It basically says that you owe me 3%. I actually can't even unlock the door unless you agree to this in writing beforehand. And they're like, well, we're just looking at homes. We're not buying a home. We're just looking right now. Well, that's normal for them to feel that way. If you try to pressure them into signing it to begin with, that's the wrong languaging to be using. You need to ask them where, you need to get them to a position they ask you, where do I sign? It's crucial that you get that part of this right. So you have to know what to do and say. I've got some trainings coming up where we're going to role play this. I'm going to show you how to give that buyer consultation, no matter where you're at, if you're in the office or you're at the house, if you are on the hood of the car, whatever it is, that you get that signature. So I'm going to be doing some trainings on this coming up. If for some reason you're not on my email list, if you're on my email list or not. If you're not, there should be something down in the description here that says gregsprioritylist.com. If you go there, gregsprioritylist.com, all that does is it gets you on my email list so I can let you know about the trainings coming up. That's about all I send out is valuable content, downloads you can use, free trainings that we're offering. So you can go to gregsprioritylist.com to get information on that. But this type of approach is crucial to your success and saying the right things, presenting it the right way, and really building value around what it is that you offer. Okay. Showing them how you can save them money, showing them how you can get them better access, showing them how you can help along the way as their representative. Not saying something silly like, I care about your best interest. I'm going to negotiate for you. You need someone to represent your best interest in this transaction. You don't want to go to the listing. I know the area like the back of my hand. I'm a good negotiator. All the crap that everybody says, they'll be like, that ain't worth 3%. I'd rather cut you out of the deal than to pay you 2 or 3 or whatever your number is. They would rather cut you out. It actually kind of makes sense to cut you out in their opinion. So what you need to do is build value around what you're doing. We've been testing a video that's working very, very well. So when we initially get this lead, before we meet them face to face, before we meet them at a home, anything else, we show them this video that kind of walks through exactly how it works now, what the rules are, why they're signing, how you're going to help them along the way, and what your fee structure is. Game changer for the agents that are utilizing this. So we've started creating these videos for agents. It's kind of a custom project to customize it to you, your brokerage, what it is that you do, but give really what I would consider an explainer video. How do you have an explainer video that says, hey, here's how buyer representation works now. Here's how pay structure works. Here's how the commission works. Here's how I negotiate for you. That sales copy is crushing it right now. So our results are in and continue coming in on how well that's working. You got to be able to present this to the buyers in a way that makes sense to them. So I'll be showing some of that stuff. For those of you that are following the page here, make sure you're following this page and you ring the bell. You follow this channel and ring the bell to turn on notifications. It's crucial you do that or you're going to miss out on these things. I think my team put in the chat here that gregsprioritylist.com. You should be able to click on that just to make sure you are on our email list. But moving forward from August 17th, I know some brokerages in some states have already made this switch, but starting August 17th, you must have a signature in advance on how you are paid. You can't say 2.5% or whatever the seller is willing to pay. That is not legal. That is not compliant with the new rules. You can't say 2.5%, but I'm willing to reduce it. That is not compliant. You're not allowed to do that. You can't put on there whatever the seller is willing to pay me. That's specifically the reason the lawsuit started in the first place. Definitely not compliant. You have to have a specific number or percentage, and someone needs to come up with that money. Now, the last thing you want to do as a business owner, let's put your CEO hat on for a minute. The last thing you want to do is say, well, I always negotiated 2.5, but if the seller's only willing to pay this, then that's all. You didn't even write an offer for them to pay you more. You just decide you are going to work for less money because the seller and the listing agent sucked in the way they negotiated their deal. So now you are screwed. Your family is screwed on income because you don't know how to negotiate. What if they said they aren't paying closing costs? What if they said they're not paying title insurance? What if they said they won't pay any agents? You have to know how to negotiate. Now you will need to be a good negotiator. Now is the time. You can't just say that's what you do. You actually have to be very, very good at this and the way you're doing it. And most importantly, build value around that so that the buyer does stick with you. They do believe you deserve that fee. A lot of that will come down to your explainer video. A lot of that's going to come down to the way that you teach this to the general public, to the prospects that you have out there. But the last thing you need to be worried about is calling around, if you've got 5 showings today, and calling around to all 5 of the listing agents to ask them how much the seller's willing to pay. I don't care how much the seller, it can be 0, it can be 5. Because here's the thing, if for some crazy reason the seller was willing to pay 5, you know what the new rule states? You're not allowed to get that extra money. If your agreement says 2.5 and the seller was paying 3.5, that's towards closing costs and concessions. You can't just take that money because there was extra money there. You're allowed no more than your 2.5, and that other 1% would go towards allowable closing costs, prepaids, or whatever. And it is highly unethical for you to say, "Oh, well, we'll just write a new agreement, so I get that extra 1%. We'll just cancel that agreement and we'll start a new one where I get more." I promise you will lose your license over this. I promise you that's going to be the case. You can't just be, "Oh, there's an extra $1,200 laying around here that my buyer could use towards their other closing costs, but the seller said I should get it, so we're just going to do a new agreement so I get it." I promise you that's not going to end well for you or for your brokerage or for your E&O insurance. That is not going to be a good thing. So you need to know how this works. Unfortunately, brokers have no idea how to. That's the reason they call them that, because they're broker than the agents. The brokers have no idea how to teach what needs to be done here. The board of realtors is freaking lost and confused. From all of the agents I've talked to around the country, they said, "I've been to 3 meetings, and every time I go there, everybody leaves pissed off and actually fighting in the parking lot about what this means or what that means, or that's not how it's going to work." The attorneys have done a good job creating a lot of work for themselves coming up soon. There will be a lot of lawsuits. There will be a lot of agents that are truly lost and confused. They do the wrong thing and they get screwed in the end. You know why? Because your broker is going to try to avoid lawsuits and try to avoid problems and try to avoid complaints. So they're going to say, "You messed it up. You need to do the deal for free. You messed it up. You only get 1%. That's going to continue happening. So you have to be trained up on how to do it the right way. It all comes down to disclosure. It all comes down to educating them, showing them the value that you truly bring. Now, for those like these videos that we've been doing here that we've been testing out, I haven't really released it to the public yet, but we've been testing it out with a couple of our top members. And it's really good at showing the new rules and how to be compliant and that type of thing, but more importantly, building value around what we do, why you are different as a buyer's agent, and why they should work with you over a flat fee person, over their cousin who's a realtor, their hairdresser who also has a real estate license. You have to build value around what you're doing. So we've done a really good job at that, and I think this is going to make everybody step their game up tremendously. But understand, you are negotiating before you ever find the house, let alone who the seller is. You're negotiating how much you're getting with your buyer client. Then you'll negotiate if you want someone else to pay that on behalf of your buyer client. Make sure you've got that. So again, the fee you're negotiating is with your buyer before you find a house. My recommendation is you tell that buyer that you're going to try your damnedest that once we get a home, we'll get that seller to pay all or a significant portion of that fee for you. We'll build it into the deal essentially, which means you bring less money to closing, less money out of pocket. That's the way it's going to work. That's the way you should be handling it, which means if the seller's agent calls me and says they're paying 1%, I don't care. That's not what I'm writing the offer at. When I send them the offer and the listing agent's like, "Well, I told you the seller's only willing to pay 1%. Figure it out. If you want the sale, you'll figure it out. My buyer requires closing costs in order to get to the closing table. If my buyer is not the right one for you, that's totally fine. Okay. That's how you're going to set this up. So I do have a lot of trainings coming up on this. Again, check it out. I think my team put it in the chat here, gregsprioritylist.com if you're not already on our email list here. But most importantly, make sure you are following this channel and you ring the bell. You know what would be really wise for you to do? Tag another agent that you know right in here in the comment section, type their name in here, or better yet, forward this to them, share this page with them, because we have to do a good job of educating all realtors. See, with this approach, you're not going to do better by having an advantage in your marketplace. You're going to do better if everybody in your marketplace knows how to operate accordingly. If all agents are on the same page, so we can all work the right way. We're not pre-negotiating commissions or anything like that, but we're saying, look, everything's negotiable now. Let's make it negotiable. You know, I see all these agents saying, "Well, when I talk to my sellers, I'm telling them they should pay 3%. That's specifically what the problem is. Don't act like you're honorable and you're doing such a great service for the community by saying 3%. What I would do is I would say most of the contracts we have that come in are going to want a little bit of closing costs, and they're probably going to ask for 3% in commissions to be paid as well. That is totally negotiable, but I want you to be prepared for that in advance. Well, I'm not willing to pay them anything. That's fine. Would you like me to tell all 5,000 realtors you're not going to pay them? Because what do you think would happen if you told me you're not going to pay me today? As we're sitting at your kitchen table, if you say, I'm not willing to pay my listing agent, what do you think would happen to me? That's what's going to happen to those 5,000 agents as well. So if you know how to negotiate the right way, if you get your languaging down and you know how to build confidence in a confident but not cocky manner, just an educational based presentation, I think you'll find that you're becoming a leader, which means more of these people are going to follow you. If you think you're a leader and nobody's following you, you're just going for a walk. I want to show you how to truly be a leader and get these people following you, taking your advice, doing what you're supposed to do. So hopefully that's helpful for you there. Any questions at all that you have, feel free to reach out to us here. I've got a lot of trainings coming up on this, but today's moral of the story, I don't give a damn how much the listing agent is offering. That's not what I'm going to get. That's not what the seller's ultimately going to pay, because I'm a good negotiator and I'm negotiating on behalf of my buyer. Hopefully that makes sense for you today. I'm Greg Luther. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye for now.